This is Ian Hartley.
I am Warren Kay.
And I am Sasha Steenbergen.
Welcome to the Rediscovering God Dialogue.
We invite you to join us as we endeavor to see Him more clearly
And love Him more dearly while following Him more nearly. Welcome to everyone that is joining us for another episode of the Rediscovering God podcast. And today we continue with the signs that John gave in his book, The Gospel of John, that showed that Jesus was the Messiah. And so this is sign number 5, which is recorded in John chapter 6, and it is Jesus walking on the water. Ian, why don't you introduce that to us?
So there's the signs, the miracles that John calls signs because they're pointing you in the direction of Jesus is divine. This is an interesting one because it's very private. It's not done in public. It's just Jesus and the disciples. And it's really intriguing, this whole story. And one can allegorize it. So we need to talk just for a few seconds about the difference between a parable and an allegory. So, parable has one main point. The details are not literal. It's like a joke. A joke has a punchline, and when you say an Englishman and a Scot and an Irishman are traveling in their Jaguar, you know this is a joke. And the details are not important. You're waiting for the punchline, and it's a terrible disappointment if you don't get it.
Exactly. Like right now, I'm waiting for one.
An allegory, on the other hand, the details are all important. And it's not just a punchline. And so, like in this one, Jesus walking on the water can be taken to be the world, and the boat is the church. And you need to invite Jesus into the church, and we need to be in the church. You get the point.
Yeah.
All the details important. Okay, so whether there's a parable or an allegory, it really is up to the reader, or the teacher, or the preacher, whatever. So let's get right into it. John 6:16, Sasha.
When they got into a boat, and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough.
Okay, thank you. So in verse 23, Lake Galilee will be referred to as the Sea of Tiberias.
Okay.
So Tiberius is a Roman emperor. And what this means is that the Caesar claimed even the water in Israel belonged to him. So when you see, this is what you can do, and some people are experts at this. So when Jesus walks on the water, it's prophetic that one day he will take over the Roman Empire.
Cool. Yeah, I like that.
You like that?
Yeah.
Now, there's some people who really, this fascinates them, and they can do. There was a period in church history when all the teachers and preachers were allegorizing everything in the Bible. And so I'm not too much into it. So I'm glad you are, Warren. You'll pick up the nuances, and we'll see where Sasha goes with this. The disciples were used to sailing at night because they fished at night, and they used a lantern that they hung over the side of the boat to attract the fish, and then they would throw their nets out.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is, why did they leave Jesus? Why wasn't he in the boat with them? And now you can make all sorts of allegorical conclusions and say things like, well, sometimes Jesus leaves you alone so that you sense your need of him, blah, blah, blah. You know, Warren would like that. Do you want to pick it up and go with it, Warren?
No, I think, as I recall the story, Jesus had sent them away because he dispersed the crowd. The crowd was intent on making him king.
Yes.
And so because he just fed the 5,000, right? This is following that story.
Yes.
And so, so he sends them off, sends the disciples into the boat. And then he, interestingly enough, he's on the shore in prayer, watching them on the lake, and as they struggled. And then he finally comes out to rescue them.
So I want to point out that this is the same temptation that the devil brought to him, that he's facing, when he offered him all the kingdoms of the world if he would bow down and worship him. So the people want to make him king.
Mm-hmm.
They're offering him the kingdom of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if he accepts it, this will obviate his need for being tortured and to be executed.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
He will be accepted. So it's a very powerful temptation for Jesus. You know, we read it and we sort of dismiss it. Oh, Jesus knew better and the people were fickle and so on. But if Jesus was tempted, and we have every reason to believe these were real temptations, then he faced it here again.
Yes.
So you also read verses 17 and 18. 18 says, a strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. So what do you make of that? Would you say that the devil was trying to destroy the disciples? He knew the potential of these men being with Jesus. And
yeah, I've heard that described, that the devil was behind the storm. He was the one that was causing the waves and the wind, because he wanted to destroy the beginning of this church that Jesus was establishing.
Mm-hmm. So, there's a perspective on trouble in our lives, is that often it's brought on us to cancel out the positive influence we can have. And we don't often see it in that way. We see it rather as an annoyance that, and were you afraid to marry Tay?
No.
But he's stronger than you. And spousal abuse is very common in the world.
Yeah.
And you didn't know him like you know him now.
Yeah, true.
To me, it's amazing that women marry men because it's so full of potential problems.
Yeah.
My wife married me, but somehow you had. It's not that you were ignorant of the possible problems, but you had a bigger picture in mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Jesus said, in this world, you'll have trouble. I mean, whether you follow Jesus or not, you have trouble.
True.
You're better off with a friend walking with you when the trouble comes than having the enemy goading the trouble on.
Well, and some of the confusion I think that people experience is they're not sure whether their troubles are coming from the devil or from God. Maybe God's trying to teach me something in this. And so then it becomes confusing because, so it's helpful to understand how God functions and how, at least from what I have concluded, is the Lord knows there's enough trouble happening in this world that he doesn't need to send trouble to us. He's there with us to grow us and to help us through the troubles that we encounter, either troubles that we get ourselves into, or like this storm, the enemy attacks us. And so he's there as a comforter and a guide. I didn't see Jesus going around causing trouble for people. The only people that he caused trouble for were the leaders that were resisting his message.
He does say, and that he did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And someday we should talk about that.
Yeah.
So that Sasha can sleep at night. So let's move on with verse 20, Warren.
Verse 20, but he said to them, it is I.
Oh, sorry, I missed it. We need
19.
verse 19, yes.
Yes. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified.
So Mark says they were in the middle of the lake. If you stand on the shore of Lake Galilee, you can see the other side. It's miles, but you can actually see the other side. And rowing for 3 or 3.5 miles, how long do you think that would take?
Well, it would depend how much wind you have pushing against you, pushing you back with every row stroke.
Yeah, you're assuming a headwind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's leave the wind out. How fast do you think you can row a boat? You can walk about 3-4 miles an hour. A brisk walk.
So, yeah, I suppose, it might be a little bit more with rowing, a little slower.
Yeah, so they've probably been rowing 2 hours, 3 hours.
Yeah.
Well, they're used to rowing.
Yeah.
Mark 6:47 says they're in the middle of the lake. That means they're not expecting any guests to pop in.
True. True.
Yeah.
They don't really grasp who Jesus is. They see him as a miracle man, sort of a magician, but they don't get that he's actually God.
Right.
And I can tell that from what happens later in the story here. And so it says they're terrified.
Right, because they said they saw that Jesus was approaching, so they saw who it was, but they're obviously seeing him through some very fresh eyes here.
Yeah. Well, if you saw someone walking on water, I mean, what would you think?
I know.
Get your attention pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know if you've watched The Shack.
Yes.
That was clever.
Yes.
How did they do that?
Yeah.
You're not going to tell me?
No, I think they had some glass under the water, actually, from what I remember, but I don't know exactly.
I mean, for the two of them just to head off and walk across the water, it looked pretty casual.
So Jesus talks to them. Look what he says, verse 20. Sasha?
But he said to them, it is I, don't be afraid.
They didn't recognize Jesus because they didn't expect Jesus. And walking on water confused them even more. And they were so preoccupied with the danger that they were facing that they'd lost their faith in God and that he cared for them and loved them. So this happens to me on a regular basis, you know. I don't like about you guys.
Well, I was just thinking about the fact that they saw Jesus with them every day. He was a human to them. And we totally assume people, when we are with people, that they are human like us, the way that we have our insecurities and our doubts and all the things. But for them now, like, how do you expand your picture of somebody who you know to that degree? It's I was going to say mind blowing, but I'm going to change that to mind expanding.
You got it.
You know, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of the other times when Jesus would perform a miracle and they would, when I guess it's at the end of this story where he calms the sea. Now that was when he was sleeping in the boat, and they just like they are just marvel, like, who is this person? Who is this man that we've been with all this time?
Right. Yeah.
So you know, in Jesus' statement, where it's translated in the version we're using, it is I. The Greek actually allows for I am. You know, the way that when Moses said to the voice out of the burning bush, who shall I say sent me? I mean, you can't go to people and say a voice out of a burning bush told me. You know, you have to give some authenticity, some credibility to this. And the voice says, tell them I am. And the Greek actually allows you to say the same thing here. Jesus said, I am. Don't be afraid.
That's powerful.
So maybe this is why they recognize Jesus, just by his response. Because he uses this key phrase, key statement from Moses' story. It's really interesting how we recognize people. There's certain sounds in the way we speak that when somebody calls you, you can identify them from their voice.
Yeah. So true.
And then some people have phrases that they repeat. The most annoying phrase, if you want to annoy me, is say basically. Start every sentence with basically, and you will basically drive me crazy.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh, I love it. I'm going to try and remember that.
You will the next time somebody says basically. So look, we need to go to Matthew 14 and read 28 to 31, because Matthew puts detail here that is very intriguing. So Matthew 14, 28 to 31. Warren?
Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water.
And keep reading to 31.
Okay. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, and he was afraid, and began sinking, cried out, Lord, save me.
Thank you. So let's just talk about this first statement. Yeah, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. What is going on here?
Really? I mean, how on earth did that come into his mind? Like, what was he trying to prove? But go and walk on water with Jesus. I don't know. I don't understand.
I love how he's like half adult, half kid here. It's like, okay, well, I need to make sure that this is you and, do the reasonable thing here. And then the second half is, let me walk with you. I want to try it too, like just like totally like how a kid would want to try it.
Yeah, for sure.
You got to love this guy, It's so authentic.
Yeah.
It's not trying to be sophisticated and hiding behind faking to make it. It just puts it out there.
Yeah.
I like your statement, is half adult, half kid. Like that.
The other thing that I wondered about too, though, was like, could he not swim? Because, when he starts sinking, like he gets terrified in this, right? And then I'm just wondering, is that a thing that he couldn't swim, or was there more to this?
I remember there's a storm on the lake. The waves are high.
Yeah.
So, Peter, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. And he could have been thinking, I'm dreaming. I'm wanting to be saved, and this is a bad dream that I'm part of. Say he wants to kind of snap out of the dream.
Yeah, snap out of it. Yeah.
Step into reality.
Yeah.
If you're watching a scary movie, sometimes you have to do this, to cope with your emotional stress.
You got to turn the music down sometimes. Just that helps.
Yeah. But then we could be a little bit more judgmental and think, well, Peter wants to demonstrate his courage, his superiority to his friends in the boat, and he's going to make his move.
Oh, I don't even think that at all.
No. Okay. Yeah, you're too kind. You're not old and cynical.
Or the other aspect that he could have taken his eyes off Jesus to look back at the others to say, guys, do you see what I'm doing here?
Yes. Okay, now respond to that, Sasha.
True, but there again, I would say he's like a kid who's like, oh my goodness, look at this. Isn't this crazy? Totally innocent.
So I want to give you the parallel for what's happening here, is that when you just subtly drop these indicators of your holiness, as I was having my devotions this morning, it suddenly struck me, This is Peter looking back, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
The other day when I was witnessing to his
the other day, as I had breakfast with the mayor of Red Deer, I've heard that before.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting a bit close to home now.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
The medal now.
So you see how easy it is to allegorize this story, and say when he took his eyes off Jesus, he began to sink. Brothers and sisters, when we take our eyes off Jesus, that's when we start to sink.
Oh boy, yeah.
Okay, so you see, there's something about Peter looking back. This is all intertwined here. That this causes doubt in his mind, and he begins to sink. Okay, he's no longer trusting in Jesus. Is now trusting. Look what I can do, guys. I'm walking on water with Jesus, and
I just heard it differently. It was fabulous. I just heard it. And it's the coolest thing because I've always struggled with this line because he says this a few times, but it was in a chuckle. It was in the friendliest chuckle. Like, we've got no worries here. Nothing's going to happen to us. You know, you have little faith. You don't see it. It's okay. Why didn't you trust me? You know, I got you. We're going to have fun here together. Like, I just love this. That's a reframe.
Yeah, that's a beautiful picture.
That's good.
Oh. And even that idea, you know, I don't think there's any chiding in him needing to turn around and look and all the things, you know, he's just experiencing, he's just feeling it all out, just like a kid would, you know, a kid is going to do the climbing up and exploring and then the turning around and then the getting scared and going, are you sure? Like, I don't know if I can do this, you know, and then Jesus, he's got you anyways, like the whole way through.
So apparently in this next season, The Chosen, they do this story of, of Peter walking on the water. And so it'll be interesting to see how they frame it in The Chosen.
Yeah, for sure.
So when a person has doubt and you feel bad about your doubts, where does that come from?
I think Satan tries to insert that feeling of insecurity.
Sometimes it originates within us. We remember our history and the times we failed.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine a child learning to walk. Every time he gets up to try again, he thinks, wow, I've tried this 15, 20 times and it hasn't worked. I don't think it'll work again.
Mm-hmm.
The child doesn't think like that. They just keep trying. But as you become an adult, you start to think like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It also comes from other people who tell you can't do something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those negative tapes sometimes get very deeply entrenched in our minds at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go back to John 6, verse 21.
Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading.
So there's an astonishing addition to the narrative. When they were willing to take him into the boat, let's unpack that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, they were terrified.
Mm-hmm.
They imagined him to be some versions say ghost, but some evil spirit or some apparition. So they would have been hesitant to take Jesus or the apparition into the boat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess the fact that Peter walked on the water with him convinced all the rest of the disciples that it really was Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And they must have both walked back and walked towards the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And so they recognize this is actually Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes Jesus is wanting to enter our hearts and we don't recognize him. We're suspicious.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
When you're a teenager, or let me make this personal. When I was a teenager, I felt that if I established a relationship with Jesus, it would spoil my fun, because the two of you are superior to me in terms of holiness. So you never had that problem. You just were enthusiastic always, right?
No, I think I certainly experienced feelings like that as well. The fear that, oh, I hope the Lord comes soon, but I hope he doesn't come before I get a chance to get married, or
Mhm.
and yeah, we all experience that.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me that we see it that way, because I remember exactly the same thing. Okay, just I want you to come, I know, but I haven't kissed a boy yet, or I haven't had all those other experiences yet. And it's so funny that we're thinking, we're worried that God's going to take away the very things that he like designed and created for us. It's just so hilarious now, looking back to it. But yeah, I mean, the best joy and the best bliss that we can experience here on earth are things that God actually created for us. And so it's so interesting that, when we're younger, we think, well, we don't see so many things, but it's interesting.
I once heard a sermon. I've never forgotten the title. It was called My Great Escape.
Oh.
And it was by a man, an evangelist, who told about listening to all the stories of people who'd been saved from the pit of sin, and their wonderful stories, how dramatic they were. And he thought, well, maybe I should descend into the pit of sin so that God can save me, and I have a good story to tell.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I can remember feeling that, these speakers would come, have week of prayer at school and tell about their life, and I thought, I've never, my life is boring compared to that.
Exactly. The twists and turns are not nearly as windy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the next interesting statement in this verse 21 is that immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading.
Right. Yeah.
Now, what's that got to do with it? Why is that in there?
Yeah, I've wondered about that. I really don't know, because yeah.
It's storytelling at its finest. That's what I love about it, because it could have totally been one of those miracles where, the second they get in, now they're at shore. I mean, it's perfect for movies. And yet it's so great that it's sort of like, yeah, well, the climax of the story happened. Now we're at the end. Like, let's get there. They don't talk about, the other 2 hours rowing to the other side where they're all talking and they're going, I can't believe it. And then, they're just having this full discussion and he's like, oh my goodness. And then I was sinking. And then, like, it's just, it's brilliant.
This is why it's so easy to allegorize this story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because at the moment you make that acceptance of Jesus into your heart, you arrive at a place of peace.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah.
I like that.
You're good. You're better at this than you let on.
Yeah, you happen to have a knack for it.
You're being negative influences in my life, repent. So I come back to this. This is a private miracle for the disciples. There were others. By others, I mean private miracles. The coin in the fish's mouth. Remember when Peter tells the Pharisees, no, my master pays tax, and prophets were exempted from tax. So Jesus sends him to catch a fish, and in his mouth he finds the equivalent of the tax money. So this is very private, this miraculous event.
Mm-hmm.
And when he sends the disciples out to heal people and cast out demons, now I know it's done in public, but this must have had a huge influence in these disciples' experience and their self-image and who Jesus was.
Right.
And it's interesting that none of the gospel writers tell about their experience when they did that.
Mm-hmm.
They keep this story focused on Jesus and his miracles. They didn't get sidetracked and include their story about the miracles that they performed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or even what it was like for them while these things are happening.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And remember when Peter tries to slice off somebody's head and misses, he's a fisherman, not a soldier, and just lops off Malchus, the high priest servant's ear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, I know there were other people there, but that's sort of a personal miracle for Peter and Malchus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no small feat there.
Yeah. I like to think of Jesus licking off the soil on the ear and then pasting it back on. Super good.
That's gonna never leave my mind again. Yeah, thank you.
Well, think of it. The ear's lying on the ground. It's got to be cleaned off before
You've got to be clean first.
Yeah, because you know, you don't want infection to get started.
And then the transfiguration was just for 3 disciples.
Right.
Yeah.
And then after the resurrection up in Galilee, when Jesus meets his disciples who've gone from fishers of men back to fishing, because they're totally disillusioned and depressed, and they throw the net out in broad daylight when the fish can see it, and they won't catch anything, but they catch 153 fish. Why they counted them,
I know.
Another interesting question. You know, we got so many questions for these gospel writers when we meet them one day.
Exactly. Yeah.
There'll be master classes on dissecting the stories.
Well, I really wonder what is significant about each of these signs, which we really don't know because we're in a different culture and a different time. But, you know, what is it about this sign that pointed to the messiahship of Jesus? Don't know.
Okay, so we're actually done with the sign now, and we're going to read some more interesting detail, and then we're going to go back to sign 4, which was the feeding of the 5,000, just to wrap up this experience. So let's read verse 22.
The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only one boat had been there, and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but they had gone away alone.
So this verse is setting the scene for what happens in verse 25. So we need to read verse 24.
Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten bread after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus.
Yes, so they must have heard of this miracle. So they went to see what had happened. And then he's not there. And so now we do the follow-up of sign 4, the feeding of the 5,000. Verse 25.
When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?"
Yes. So the question in Greek can also mean, where did you come from? Or what is your origin? It's not just a geographical question. the Messiah was expected to arrive at Passover because Passover commemorated when Moses took the people out of slavery in Egypt.
Mm.
And so Messiah was to take people out of their subjection to their oppressors. And that's why he was expected at Passover.
Mm.
The manna given in the desert wanderings was preserved in the ark and was expected to reappear at the marriage supper of the Messiah. Like this is a Hebrew tradition.
Oh.
And this is why this whole thing about the bread is so interesting, because when Jesus feeds the 5,000, he's replicating the giving of manna through Moses to the people.
Mm.
So their minds are now focused on this is Moses who's come back.
Right.
This is the anointed one, the Messiah, and we're about to be delivered.
Mm-hmm.
No wonder they wanted to make him king.
Right.
Yes, yes.
On the spot.
Mm-hmm.
So now Jesus corrects all this false expectation in verse 26.
Jesus answered, I tell you the truth. You are looking for me not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill.
So let me remind you of some of the miracles that Jesus has already done, according to the Gospel of John. At his baptism, there was this voice from heaven, and he turned water to wine, he's cleansed the temple, he's talked to the Samaritan woman, he's healed the official's son, he's healed the invalid at the pool. I've got all these miracles. And these miracles don't impress them that Jesus is divine, but when he feeds them, they're very impressed.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
this tells us, yeah.
I think it's because of the connection, the great historical connection with Moses, and that Moses said, there will be another one just like me that will come. And that, so they were realizing this was that fulfillment of that declaration.
Good. You put a positive angle on it, and I'm happy for it. I'm also a bit suspicious that when you feed a person, especially in this culture, you become instant friends.
Mm-hmm.
So they seeing something here that escapes us because of our culture. Food isn't such an important connection in our culture.
Right.
I love that, though. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're preoccupied with material benefits. I'm thinking now of saying grace. Thank you, God, for food and health and a place to stay and so on, warm clothes in winter and so on and so on and so on. Our focus, there's nothing wrong with this particularly, is usually on material benefits. And what Jesus was all about was bringing joy and happiness to people.
The inner world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's read verse 27.
Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. On him, God the Father has placed his seal of approval.
So barley loaves and lake fish spoil. The words that Jesus spoke last forever.
Mm-hmm.
The seal of God's approval was manifest at Jesus' baptism and in every other miracle that he performed.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
On Thursday mornings, Irma and I have a study with a newly baptized Adventist and an atheist.
That's awesome.
And yesterday, after talking about Romans chapter 5, the atheist, who is a very non-emotional person, he just spontaneously said, "This is very moving."
Mm. Wow. The inner world. Yeah.
6 verse 28.
Then they asked him, "What must we do to do the works God requires?"
Isn't this a great question? I meet so many people who want to do something for God.
It's a typical question that we just naturally think there's something that we need to do.
Yeah. And works are important, according to the story of the sheep and goats that Jesus tells, according to Matthew 25. Mm-hmm. Like Jesus says to the sheep, "You visited me in prison," and so on. And they're actually unaware of it. Mm-hmm. When did we do that? And so the focus wasn't on what their works would achieve for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They weren't important because, in the sense that they were simply a natural outflow of the love they had experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like when a child says, "Well, you cared for me when I was little. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad." Mm-hmm. You're not actually aware of doing that because you just do it naturally if you're a good parent. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the motivation for what we do can either be out of obligation or it can be a response to what we've received. So then verse 29.
Jesus answered, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent."
So this is a very culturally orientated statement. I mean, you've got an oxymoron here. The work is to believe. This is a typical Middle Eastern pronouncement. And I caught on to this when I had a few East European friends. And I found out that I couldn't follow their logic. And I realized that one's form of logic is very culturally dependent. And so Jesus says this, and nobody blinked an eye. But I read the statement and I say, "What?" That doesn't make sense. The work of God is to believe. Believe on the one he has sent. And Jesus says that because if you believe that Jesus is God, there are activities that will naturally flow from your heart. Out of that understanding, you are powerfully moved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It becomes something that inspires all that we do, and becomes very evident when you observe someone like that. It reminds me of those 3D pictures that were quite popular several years ago, and people would teach you how to stare at it, and it's interesting to watch people. Some would say, "Oh yeah, I see it," and that they don't see it, but all of a sudden they're just like almost pulled back because it looks like it's going to poke them in the nose, And they realize, yeah, okay, now they see it. Now they get it. And it becomes very evident.
Yeah. Well, and I was also going to say that for folks who are listening, the Monday night Rediscovering God time that we have, how encouraging that time is, because I feel like it is a really safe space to really bring up questions and dig further into this idea of how do we believe that he is who he says he is, and how does that actually start to sink in. And I just think of all the conversations that we've had and the nuances of what that looks like and the discussion around it. And so I just want to extend again, because I love how much we can really dive into this, and it takes time. I'm noticing how long it takes me to start seeing things a little bit differently here and there. So just extending a warm invitation to that time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Great commercial. Pick up your commission. Leave the office.
Join us at 6:30 Mountain Time.
Mm-hmm.
Put in the Zoom, put it on your Zoom, put in 403-906-2101, and you'll be there with us.
506.
So we just need a corrective on that number.
Oh, sorry.
403-506.
506. Sorry.
That's right. You were up late last night, Warren.
I was.
Doing works of mercy.
Amen.
So I want to concretize what Jesus said. I want to cast it in concrete by saying that when you're faced with challenges and you revert in your thinking to saying, God knows me by name. I'm precious to him. He has forgiven all my sins. He wants me to be with him forever. He will carry me through this event. You are believing on the one that he sent, who proclaimed his love, care, and compassion for us. Let's pray. Dear God, we're in your presence together. I thank you for my friend Warren and Sasha, and that we could have spent a few minutes with John telling us about Jesus and the disciples. And we believe in you, Jesus, that you truly are the Son of God who came to adopt us into the divine family of heaven, and who we treated so terribly. We repent and thank you for never rejecting us. You wonderful beyond words. Amen.
Amen.
Find the recording of our podcast on our website, as well as the PDF document that we've been using, so you can follow along or at least see all the passages. And so that website is rediscoveringgod.ca, and on there is the PDF document, the link for the podcast, as well as our YouTube link. We are now on YouTube. So if you want to see us live, then you can go and watch it on YouTube.
Wonderful. And we'd also love to invite you to our Monday evening Zoom discussion, where Ian and Warren lead us out. And we are currently going through the podcast where we get to have discussion and really dive in a little deeper and get our most pressing questions answered. It's a really wonderful time of fellowship and connection with the group. We share in community and resources as well. We'd really love to have you join us. We're going to be meeting at 6:30 Mountain Standard Time. You just add in the link 403-506-9201. We'd love to see you.
And if you'd like to connect with us, you can reach us at rediscoveringgod20@gmail.com. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you and know how this journey of rediscovering the God that Jesus knew is changing your life. Take care.